ever since I heard you in that reading on Second Sunday reading, I was like, oh, we have to have her on.
Well, and then I started researching a little bit about you both, and I was like, of course we're going to sort of meet at Maundy Thursday, right?
Yes. Rhyme or free, it doesn't matter to me. It's my bad poetry. Good day, and welcome to My Bad Poetry, a podcast where we take a deep dive into our poems from youth, yesteryear, or even yesterday, always asking the question, why in the world did I write this? I'm Aaron.
And I'm Dave.
And today we are joined by a writer and translator who caught our attention when she called Maundy Thursday the sexiest church service. Yep, and we have to agree. But more importantly, her work can be found in the Boston Review, Foundry, Bomb Magazine, The Guardian, just to name a few, with The Certain Body as her most recent published book. Julia Guez, it is a joy to have you on the show.
I'm so glad to be here.
Is there anything in the intro that we might have missed that you want to clarify, or?
I don't think you missed a thing. The only thing that I would add is a real gratitude for the space you're creating intellectually and otherwise for this kind of conversation, because I think it really slows us down and sets us back thinking that Auden was born writing the way he wrote. You know what I mean? And I think that there's so much about the writing life that is very solitary and very invisible, or invisible outside of somebody's writing group and so on, workshop, that you make visible, and you bring us into people's process such that we can feel like we can normalize and validate and contextualize our own process, which could go left and right and forward and back and around in circles and maybe never arrive where we think it might, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or arrive limping, whatever the case may be. And to really get us kind of granular there excites me, and I think it's going to excite a lot of my students too.
Oh, cool. Now, you're saying students. I caught that you're a writer and translator. Are you also a teacher?
I am.
Okay.
I teach right now at NYU and at Rutgers, and I teach writing.
Awesome.
But I also support and coach teachers and support and coach the people who coach teachers at Teach for America, where I work full time.
Very cool. Wow. Well, this is just continuing our string of teachers of English, so which is amazing. Dave, you get to continue your streak of sharing your hastily written poems with teachers. How do you feel about that?
I just keep thinking back, like I am a huge nerd. And so like I worked so hard all throughout school to never, ever disappoint a teacher. And it feels like my job on this podcast is to just disappoint teachers with my terrible poetry.
You're not going to disappoint this one, though. I have to say, like, I'm constantly pushing my students to play more and to fail more and simply to produce more. The more you're producing, the more options you can map, the more disappointments you come to, which are just like 2 tweaks shy of something magical. So you're not going to, no matter how crazy what you're about to run by me may seem to you, I have a feeling I'm about to eat some of it up. So my pen and paper is ready. Let's see.
Okay, well, get ready for some failure. This is called Friendly Neighborhood Poetry. Poetry, poetry, does whatever a verse can be, spins a yarn anytime, catches dreams just like eyes. Look out, here comes the poetry. Is it good? Listen, friend. It's got the power to make you mend. Can it teach hope or dread? Take a look once you've read. Hey there goes the spider. Poetry.
You had Aaron in stitches. I don't know if you why you were also reading. That was great.
Oh, man.
I couldn't come up with anything, and I was humming the Spider-Man theme song. So
there you go.
There's my homage to Spider-Man.
I love it. My sons would love it too.
I think you're just our guest, Michael Van Kalberg, is a huge Incredible Hulk fan. And so I think Dave is attempting to work his Spider-Man fandom in here without Michael being able to rebut.
I'm a huge jerk, and that is my job.
Well, there you go. Some of your rhymes didn't work. What was the one that were you rhyming I with something?
Yes.
Eyes and time.
Oh.
That technically almost sort of is a mostly slant rhyme.
Yeah.
I'll take it. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, wow. Well, as much as we could work on Dave's writing, Julia, we have you here to talk about your bad poetry. And you have given us something here that before we started recording, you compared it to runes and hieroglyphics, or at least your friends compare it. I don't know what we're looking at here, but this is an auditory medium. So do you mind describing this snapshot of the page that you have provided for us?
No worry. I would love to. So this is a quick look at a manuscript page. So literally, if you were to open up my notebook, which at the time was a $1.50 composition, marbled composition notebook you get at the drugstore.
Nice.
To a page, this is what you'd find on those two open pages. And I might write 18, 24, 30, pages by hand to get 10 lines of poetry, 12, 15. And I'll have arrows and dashes and asterisks and hearts and so on. Really, and of course, Xing out huge blocks of things, really allowing myself to move and play and leap. And the whole situation looks like somebody trying to solve an advanced, equation on a whiteboard, there's a lot there. And I do bracket and I do put in variables where I know something belongs, but I can't tell you what that something is while I'm working the rest out. But yes, it's been compared to runes, hieroglyphics. I don't know what else. Very, very difficult to read. So I don't even mind sharing it, becoming so vulnerable. This is the roughest of the rough drafts. No. I don't even expect people to make out much more than a few words here and there.
No,
that's fair.
The backslash, it looks like you're trying to assess maybe meter or syllables or what is that?
I love that you're seeing that. So in some cases, I'm crossing out certain words or phrases or attempts at punctuation, but you're exactly right. So if you see some of the things that are not crossed out, I am beginning to track and I am beginning to scan. So just to see the rhythm of the lines. And that, by the way, I think is where Dave absolutely nailed it with the last poem, is in establishing and maintaining a certain rhythm. And I'm attentive to that because there's a certain music I want my work to find or to make. And I'm not going to write in blank verse or anything per se or set out to, but I do kind of want to see what my words are doing together and make certain decisions about line breaks based on that. So yeah, I was beginning to scan it out, which Timothy Donnelly taught me how to do when I was at Columbia. And he taught this just really unforgettable class on prosody and brought us into that and brought us into his own practice. And yeah, my mind was blown. And I was, of course, really trying that out in my own drafts too.
I think it's funny that looking at your handwriting, it is extremely beautiful. If people are comparing your handwriting to hieroglyphs or something, I get that because it's very planned. My handwriting is more, I'm going to scribble a word here, and hopefully when I look back, I will recognize some of the letters. But what I'm seeing here is Elvish script.
Yes.
From Lord of the Rings. It's very beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. Well, and the important thing is that your handwriting for you and mine for me is legible to us. You know what I mean? It doesn't
That's
really
a
have
big
to be legible
assumption.
to anybody else. That's true. I'm assuming something here. It doesn't have to make itself legible to anybody else, right? By the
That's
time
fair.
anybody sees some of this work, it's going to be so cleaned up, even when it goes roughly onto the first Word document or Google Doc that it finds its way into. But we can read it.
So let's get into some of these quote unquote bad poems. I have a feeling like your definition of bad is on a whole different level than ours. But you give us multiple iterations of a meditation at Callicoon?
Yes.
So which one is the earliest draft?
I think I might have copied and pasted the earliest draft at the beginning.
At the first one. Okay. Let's hear that one. And then we'll dive in.
You got it. Okay, so here's the first draft. Meditation at Callicoon. Sad to be gathering green, then gold so fast. The trees, a filigree outline of things, made even barer before the fullnesses of season's failures forget themselves completely and come to believe in this alone, a birdlessness which couldn't be any bitterer. More and more, night pretends to a certain permanence, no less painful because it isn't real. See the crocuses in the side yard, see here the daffodils. They won't stay long either, not the way the percentages are going now. None of this will. Not the city with its sea levels rising, not the sea. No God born of the sea foam. Not even mothers and sons. This would be unbearable without.
See, we're going from Spider-Man. I actually I love this as is. I think that's beautiful.
That's very sweet. I love it too. You can see how it spawned the final draft of what would be maybe 300 tinkerings with this poem. But it's a very different poem. And I love it for what it is, but it's doing a really different thing from what like the final meditation does. Yeah.
So I'm interested. You're doing these 2-line stanzas. You had just talked about how you like a poem to kind of sing or to have a rhythm to it. Is this first draft missing that, or I didn't hear it necessarily?
Well, first of all, there's that huge, maybe 3-4. I don't know what it was. I'm not looking at the couplets now. 3-4 couplets that are just lopped off. Then the most recent draft begins more and more night pretends. So the first, let's say quarter of that poem just kind of disappears.
Just goes, yeah.
And that's where I think I get lost the most. I love what's going on syntactically there. But like you're saying, the music is a little bit lost in those sort of winding lines. And I also think that if you're working really hard, you might track what I'm up to, but it's very difficult to find and keep the thread there. Just conceptually, like what is going on? What is being invoked?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like what? It's just literally hard to read that sentence as a sentence, never mind track some of the pretty rhythms in it. So it all had to go. I'm sad. I still, like, they ghost the lines that I read from the final draft. I still miss some of these lines, particularly the sea levels rising. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of that had to go because I wanted some of the rhythms and some of the pared down sort of syntax and structure of the final draft to be uncluttered, let's say.
Yeah. I mean, you're giving us the first draft, but yeah, it does kind of meander.
Yes, absolutely. It winds.
Yeah.
And it takes its time winding. And it might lose some people on the way winding, which is exactly right.
Yeah. I will admit, I definitely, when you started asking the question, see the crocuses in the side yard, see the daffodils, I was like, I don't see them. I don't know where we are.
That's right. That's right. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I got some great advice from a poet who had become, lucky for me, a friend, and that was Mark Strand. And he said, "Listen, you can have complex language, or you can have complex ideas, but you can't have both.
Whoa.
You can't do both." And so you'll see, at least in the 3 drafts that I sent along, and I'm very grateful to say the final draft was just run in a magazine called Iterant, which, if you don't know it, you should track it down, share it with your listeners and friends. It's a really, really consistently gorgeous magazine. But its 10th issue just came out thanks to Bianca and Walter Stone and the Ruth Stone House in Vermont. And anyhow, I think I shared 3 or 4 drafts for how we got to this final one, but they get simpler and simpler and simpler and cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. And it's amazing because I do feel like there's a lot more under the surface with the last one, but a lot less that sits right on top of it. The lines are shorter. We're back to 1 block. We're not in couplets anymore.
No, right.
Those like $5 and $10 words are all out, from fullnesses and failures and filigree right to the rest. And yeah, I think it becomes more beautiful and more troubling in the best way in that final draft, but way simpler than it was in the first. With let's say a more direct route, less meandering, like you're saying.
Yeah. We normally don't do this, but let's have you read the final draft if you're comfortable doing that. Because I do think it's night and day. And it's amazing the transition from what you originally wrote.
Absolutely. So let's read this 3rd one. Here it is. More and more night pretends it isn't spring. What to make of the daffodils then? Hyacinth here and there, wind and rain. So many birds. Of course they won't stay long. None of this will. Not the night, the cold, the city full of swallows. Not the bridges and rivers, not the sea. No God born of the sea foam. Not even mothers and sons, this would be unbearable without.
It's just so much better.
I think so too. It was not easy getting from there to here. And I will say this was the very last poem that I was tinkering with, and one that I remember emailing this version to one of our editors at 4-Way Books, Ryan Murphy, and asking him very specifically about this. Did I get it right this time? Do you know what I mean? Have I pared it down too much? Is there something we lost on the way to this sort of like ruthless cutback that we want to keep? Or does this sort of work rhythmically and otherwise the way it really needs to in the version that it's in now? He said, I think you got it.
Yeah.
I feel like you are entirely right that they are different poems, and I love them both because so before doing this podcast, my exposure to poetry was being frustrated, having to read things that weren't Shakespeare because I wanted to be a big fancy boy. And so like there's some of that in the first poem, that there's that beautiful over the top language where yes, it does meander, but you can kind of pick it apart a little more and it's in the text. Right. Whereas in the second one, I'm scared to pick it apart because it's not in the text, it's in me, and that's the thing that's terrifying. So I love them both for different ways. What you just articulated
there. I love that awareness of your own reading and of what came up for you. And that right there, I will say, whatever the poem's gotten right or gotten wrong, it's done something beautiful
Right.
if it's created that experience, that micro experience for a reader even once. So I have to say, thank you for letting me into that experience, articulating it so beautifully, because that right there was really powerful to hear.
What I think is fascinating is looking back at this first draft, because having you read the final draft, I was like, oh, this is a lament of the non-permanence of life. I mean, of things that transition and change and are no longer there. And I was like, why didn't I get that from the first one? I think it was, and I go and I look, and the middle line is pretends to a certain permanence. I was like, it's spelled out in the first one, and I didn't get it. It's subtle in the second one, and it hit me over the head. I think that is fascinating.
I think so too. And I can't explain that. I can't explain how that works, but I will say, weirdly enough, if impermanence and the fact of our own impermanence is that sort of big idea, that big fish under the surface, then simple and very specific instances used to evoke that sense of impermanence in this final draft that are specific to the pandemic in the city of New York in the spring of 2020, right? Which becomes clearer when you read the next few poems in the book, and you know, this is a book that deals with endemic and systemic racism and classism and complications thereof in this moment, in this space that is the United States of America, would mean for a pandemic raging through one of our major cities. But the more specific I got, the more honed in I got, the bigger the fish could become. A fish, let's say, like impermanence, could become, let's say, in the waters between lines of this poem. And that, I think, is one of its real achievements. The worry, of course, is that I've pared so much back, and I'm asking, the daffodils and the birds and the bridges and rivers to do so much work that if it doesn't connect quite right, or if I'm not the one framing and reading the poem to somebody, it may not upset and open them up in some of the ways that this poem wants to and might. But yeah, I was so explicit in that first one.
Yes.
And so not with the second, but I do feel the second a lot more and a lot differently than I do the first. The first, I think, is still up in a like highly linguistic, highly intellectualized, like Dave was saying, sort of fancy place.
Yes.
And the fancification has come way down in the final one.
Yeah.
With the possibility that the complexity emotionally and intellectually actually goes way up. And I don't know how that works. I can't explain that magic, but I'm attentive to it. I like the way, Aaron, that you walked me through that.
So you're talking about the context in which this poem came out, early 2020, the experience that we all went through, but you're going through it in a major metropolis. Is Callicoon, is that a New York Bay, or what is that? I don't know that.
I'm glad you're asking. So it's right on the Pennsylvania border, and it's an upstate location.
Okay.
Which somehow felt really important. Potentially I was, dissociating. This was like, a mode of coping with the really strange, really new, and really terrifying place that the city was in. But Callicoon is a town upstate.
Okay.
Where we happen to have dear friends we happen to visit, in the spring and summer most years. But I was very deeply in the city of New York as all of this was happening, deep into Brooklyn, deep into my own experience, getting really sick early March with COVID. And I was not anywhere upstate. But for some reason, it felt important to get there in order to look back and write about what I was seeing and feeling and sensing in the city itself.
Wow.
Which was quiet enough for there to be birdsong there, like there is in Callicoon. Yes, for some reason that positioning really helped. And my titles throughout this collection do that kind of positioning in ways that I wonder if some of those poems would have been written without the titles giving me some of the freedom and some of the just perspective that they try to do.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
It really is.
Well, I know we have a limited amount of time, and we tend to try and tackle 2 bad poems with our guests. So what is the next one that you're willing to share with us?
We can do this one from 10 plus years ago, 12, 13. which doesn't sound like me at all. And I
Okay.
think goes to some of the registers that Dave was talking, like super, like, you know, fancy and highfalutin and so on. And, you know, there I ended up tripling the length of that poem and turning it into a little bit of a wedding song, anniversary poem, which basically takes these 7 or 8 lines and blows them up some, but in ways that I still consider unsuccessful, and I still ultimately didn't feel completely right about including in the last book, and did not include in the last book.
Okay. So is this, are we talking on the occasion of our 10th anniversary? Am I?
Yeah, so that's the
Okay.
second draft
That's the second draft.
of this poem that began and that Numinous magazine ran in 2009. So when I was still in
Okay.
graduate school. And that one, you know, Mind the Disaster. There's the second line. I'm not one for the rude, mistress of the brood, and so on. But you'll hear, I balk at the singular plow. My shoulders are slight. Hands then be strong. Lower the beam. I mean, I really like those final few lines.
Mhm.
And those would survive into this draft that 10 years later, I would fashion into this poem on the occasion of our 10th anniversary. And the word harrow recurs. I think you've got a plow still. You still got the word balk and so on. But you've got a similar ending. My shoulders are slight. Hands then be strong. Lower the beam. My love has made easy.
Okay.
And, you know, there are parts of that much longer poem that the literary review was kind enough to publish, and I love what edits somebody there named Michael Morse put on it, and I think this really works as a poem, even though as a poem I don't think it plays nicely with some of the poems in the Certain Body, but that's where you can see a similar process. I mean, if you went from the manuscript page with, you know, scrawlings and
Sure.
all over the place, then you get this super concentrated, too concentrated version in that first draft, and then a much looser, more beautiful, more lyrical, more open invocation of similar images in that second draft.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't tell you what's happening in, like, you know, the next set of drafts there. I think I'm still not finished with this poem.
Okay.
So you can tell me what you would do with it. I don't know.
Oh,
I don't
gosh.
know.
Oh, well, let's hear both iterations read
You got it.
in its entirety, and then we could dive in.
You got it. Okay, so 2009's version is this. Harrowing. Mind the disaster. I am not one for the rude. Mistress of the brood, the milk and copper pantheon. I balk at the singular plow. My shoulders are slight. Hands then be strong. Lower the beam. So that's one.
Mm-hmm.
And here's two. The 10 years between them, almost exactly. Sea green eyes, skin the color of dust. I come from a long line of firesides. We seed the open field in our mind before the soil has seen a single harrow, whose moon-cold metal teeth drag root, stone, and grass up by the hair to make the soil finer, fit for this seed. Generation after generation, we have gotten as far as the fantasy and no farther. I grow up thinking marriage is a field. I balk at the barrenness of that field and balk also at the plow. My shoulders are slight. Hands then be strong. Lower the beam my love has made easy.
Huh.
I am fascinated at the the same lines being used through, and, like, again, they are in no way the same poem.
No.
And I'm trying to, like, in my mind, put them side by side and just go, okay, so here's the through line. Nope, that's not the through line.
That's right.
Here's exactly where they meet. Nope, I don't understand. And I think that's really fun.
Yeah. So the title of the second draft is On the Occasion of Our 10th Anniversary. Now, is this the anniversary with your wife or with this poem?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I have no idea. And is this marriage? Is this monogamy? Is this a sort of monotheistic tapping of wisdom? I don't know what we're, celebrating the anniversary for and what we're working out entirely here. So I'll just leave that question unanswered and say it's a good question.
Okay.
No idea.
Yes.
Love it.
I'm just amazed at this first draft. Harrowing, mind the disaster, like kind of bring it on, lower the beam. And then all of a sudden in 10 years, it almost feels softened, or there's this expression of like, you end with my love has made easy. It sounds like an entirely different perspective on.
I think that's right.
I'm not even sure what. Again, like your question of, is this a question of marriage? But then that would make the first poem compare marriage to, I don't know, this like Herculean task.
Right. Well, and maybe this is about poetry at the end of the day. This plowing, right? This sort of the field work and the line by line and those turns and so on. And how compactly do I want to work? I was totally under the spell of Dickinson, who I was accessing through a poet named Lucy Brock-Broido when I wrote that first poem. Okay. I think I was trying to sound a little bit too much like them both, not yet knowing what it meant like in my practice to sound a little bit more like me. So I do think this second one sounds a lot more like me, but not as much like the poems that I've worked out in the rest of the Certain Body. And it's still, you can tell it's sort of a carryover and something I'm trying to salvage and resuscitate and reshape from some earlier time that isn't quite. That's all I'll say. I feel like that last poem isn't quite, which, creates all these possibilities around, well, what might I do with it 10 years from now? I don't know. We have to have like another podcast and talk about it, I want to unpack that with you both then.
Yes, for sure. Oh, I love some of these images up here. I would never imagine the color of dust. To have, skin described as the color of dust. Right. When, like, being pastors, remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Right. The dust is skin stuff. It's
100%.
Yeah.
And here now we've gone from Maundy Thursday into an Ash Wednesday.
Yes.
Invocation.
We're doing this.
We're going backwards.
I will say, that is one poem in this new book that I think you all will really grok. Given some of the work you did in seminary and some of the exegesis you've done, and just the leadership thought leadership you've taken in your work. But the middle section of the book is one 5-part poem that structures itself around Ash Wednesday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, the Saturday Vigil, and Easter Sunday services.
Wow.
Okay. And it's loosely engaged, but you all will definitely sense it in the way that, Aaron, you just sensed that skin and that dust, like that thing that we can do when we're just sort of in the mix with the way dust has been, figured in certain narratives and symbolic systems.
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah, we're just kind of steeped in it.
Yeah.
What I love about these two examples that you give us of what is really not bad poetry in our eyes, but I love that you think this, is we get an example of a coupleted poem getting condensed down into a block, and now a block poem getting split up into a couplet.
Yeah.
And it's like, the process that goes behind these things of that phrase that I don't really like, but killing your darlings in the
Right.
first one, and then
Right.
on this one, you're almost exploring and expanding, and how both are examples of revision.
That's right. That's right. And they'll both land you in really different places. And that would be my encouragement, to what Dave was saying earlier, about just not wanting to disappoint anybody. It's like, that's where you have to try many potentially disappointing avenues before you find the one that, you sort of swing left on, that might bring you into this field where like you'd really like to open this thing up some. And you can click to expand or click to collapse and try 19, other iterations, between those two sort of extreme positions that might get you closer. I don't know if we ever get there, and maybe that's not the point, but we'll get closer. And I like that, thinking of that as a point,
Sure.
Yeah.
Finding it along the journey, even if it's not what you expected it to be.
That's it. Or finding what you needed to find. Maybe it's not what you thought you were going to find or wanted to find there, but there's this just trust and surrender, ultimately, however you might be kicking and screaming along the way, to what your dream life wants to open up to sort of guide you on, or guide you through, or guide you with, and what maybe your art making life, your poetry making life might want to do on that front too. And they both sometimes can deliver these just real surprises that are like these magical little gifts that keep opening into other gifts and keep giving.
Yeah. So could you remember or think back on the context, the 2009 Julia writing that first one versus 10 years later? Like, is there a seismic shift in your attitude, or was there an experience in between those two that might have influenced this, what feels like a seismic shift in the poem itself?
For sure. And in the poet. I mean, I think that poem needed to be broken open wide, and was. And I'd say the same about my relationship to poetry. I mean, I'd been really wide ranging in my interests as a reader. I came under the spell of this one poet in particular when I was in graduate school, both personally and as a reader and a lover of poetry. And I felt like I just went into this world that she created, lexically and energetically and otherwise. And I was just enthralled. And that said, that was her world, right? That she'd made. That was her Narnia. That was her sort of, her set. And I needed to build my own. So, in that 10 years, I really worked to do that. And I read widely again and found myself in a handful of different writers groups that had folks coming from all different directions and schools and aesthetics and traditions. And that was really good mix for me. And I also read and wrote for another 10 years, and then came into some techniques and tools and powers that I wanted to keep exploring that I didn't even know about in 2009,
Yeah.
And it makes me hopeful about what I might find in 2029,
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Well, I know you have more to do today.
It's true. It's true.
So we have covered a certain body of your work.
I love it.
Yes.
Don't encourage him. Don't.
But before we let you go, we here at My Bad Poetry, we end each week with the words of a true poet. So, Julia Guez, would you be willing to share another one of your poems with us to end our session?
Absolutely. We're going to end on one. Nobody needs to understand. Let me just say it that way. And there's a little bit of magic in this one, which is called Still Life with Vicodin. Thank you all both for doing what you're doing and creating this space and just being amazing human beings and readers and pastors that you are.
This is just so fun. I love this.
It's the best. It's the best. Maybe there is no magic, no technicolor, but inside the seed, there is a kingdom. Ask me anything. I will tell you the truth. It is a fatal wound for every wolf and thimble. Even the night watchman is not immune. We may as well sing, George, inside the throat, a carriage, a pony, a parachute.
I don't think I will ever understand, and I love it.
Yes. The point is not to understand, just to be with it for a while, to walk together, and then to see what that might, work on us with, writer and reader alike, and dreamlike. Like, what is that about? Who is George? And so on.
Yeah, it's definitely that dream state where it's just like something comes up and in the moment it's not surprising, but when you think about it, you're like, that makes no sense. And that is fun.
That's right.
Well, Julia, this has been a blast. We are so grateful for your time, for your wisdom, and for what you consider bad poetry.
That's just unfair.
All are very dear. Thank you so much for this. What an honor to join you. And yes, I'll be listening.
Yes. So you can find A Certain Body, which is published now, and your earlier work, which is
In an Invisible Glass Case, which is also a frame.
Yes. Yes. This has been My Bad Poetry.
Now go write your own bad poetry.
Nice.
Oh, that was wonderful.
Thank you all.
Rhyme free doesn't matter.